The DC Extended Universe was supposed to be Marvel's biggest competitor. Instead, it became one of the most chaotic experiments in blockbuster history, a franchise that produced genuine masterpieces and absolute disasters, sometimes from the same director in the same year. Today, we're looking at the 5 best and 5 worst DCEU movies ever made, and why some understood exactly what these characters needed to be, while others collapsed under studio interference, reshoots, and a complete loss of identity. Starting with the film that started it all, Man of Steel had the hardest job in the DCEU: convince audiences that Superman, the most powerful and least relatable hero in comics, could carry real emotional weight. Zack Snyder did it by making Krypton's destruction a slow-burning tragedy instead of a prologue, and by framing Clark Kent's childhood as a story about isolation, not destiny. The Smallville flashbacks, Jonathan Kent telling Clark he might have to let people die to protect his secret, are more morally complicated than anything in a Superman film before or since. Henry Cavill plays Clark as someone genuinely uncertain whether the world deserves him, and that uncertainty is what makes the final act land. The Metropolis destruction is divisive, but the film's emotional center, a godlike being, learning what it costs to be human, never wavers. It grossed over $668 million worldwide and remains the most rewatched origin story in the franchise for a reason. It took Superman seriously when nobody else had in decades. But while Man of Steel proved a brooding, serious take on a god could work, the very next film in the franchise's timeline shows what happens when 2 incompatible visions get stitched together by force. The theatrical Justice League is less a movie than a visible crime scene. After Snyder stepped away following a family tragedy, Joss Whedon was brought in for reshoots and ended up rewriting roughly a third of the film, and it shows in nearly every scene. The CGI used to remove Henry Cavill's mustache is still one of the most discussed visual effects failures in blockbuster history. Steppenwolf is a non-entity of a villain, generated almost entirely in post-production, with motivations that amount to wants box. The tonal whiplash between Snyder's grim instincts and Whedon's quippy reshoots as constant characters crack jokes mid-scene that feel grafted on from a different movie entirely. The film made $657 million worldwide against a reported $300 million budget and was considered a box office disappointment relative to its cost. It's not a film that failed because of one bad decision. It failed because 2 incompatible visions were stitched together and nobody smoothed the seams. But while Justice League collapsed because Snyder's vision got overwritten, giving that exact same director full creative control years later produced one of the most ambitious redemptions in superhero history. The Snyder Cut exists because of one of the strangest fan campaigns in movie history, and it's rare that the campaign was actually right. Where the 2017 theatrical version felt like a committee-edited highlight reel, the 4-hour Snyder Cut is a complete, deliberately paced story with actual character arcs. Cyborg goes from a footnote to arguably the emotional core of the film. His relationship with his father is genuinely moving in a way the theatrical cut never had room for. Steppenwolf gets a real motivation instead of generic villain noise. The nightmare sequences are unsettling in a way blockbusters rarely commit to. It's overlong, unapologetically operatic, and Snyder's slow motion habit is everywhere, but it's a film that knows exactly what story it's telling and never compromises that vision for studio notes. Fans consistently rank it as the definitive version of the Justice League, and the difference between the 2 cuts became a case study in how much directorial vision actually matters. While the Snyder Cut proved that a clear, uncompromised vision could redeem a disaster, the franchise's next sequel had every advantage in the world and still managed to undermine its own hero. Wonder Woman, 1984, had every advantage a sequel could ask for: a beloved lead, a proven director, a built-in audience desperate for more, and it squandered almost all of it on a central plot mechanic, a wish-granting stone that actively undermines its own hero. Diana spends most of the film selfishly wishing Steve Trevor back from the dead, which means the most iconic superhero of her generation is sidelined by a decision that makes her look weak rather than aspirational. Kristen Wiig's Cheetah arc rushes a transformation that needed an entire film to earn. Pedro Pascal's Maxwell Lord is a genuinely committed performance trapped in a script that doesn't know when to stop escalating his powers. The renouncing your wish climax, which requires every person on Earth to simultaneously have a change of heart, is one of the most criticized endings in the franchise. It opened during the pandemic to lower numbers than expected, and the reception only got worse from there. The first film worked because Diana's idealism was tested by the world. This one works against itself by testing her idealism with a screenplay that doesn't trust her character. But while WW84 betrayed everything that made its hero work in the first film, that very first Wonder Woman remains the clearest example of the DCEU getting tone exactly right. Wonder Woman is the DCEU film that finally understood tone. Patty Jenkins built the first hour and a half as something close to a fish-out-of-water adventure, funny, warm, genuinely curious about the human world through Diana's eyes before turning into one of the most effective war films of the genre. The No Man's Land sequence works because the film spent enough time making you believe in Diana's idealism first. When she walks out of the trench, it's not just a power fantasy, it's the payoff of everything established about who she is. Gal Gadot's performance carries sincerity without irony, which was a genuinely rare thing in 2017 blockbusters, drowning in quips. The film made over $822 million worldwide and proved, after Catwoman and Elektra had been used for years as excuses not to make female-led superhero films, that the entire premise was nonsense. Wonder Woman didn't just save the DCEU's reputation, it reset what the genre thought was commercially possible. While Wonder Woman thrived on sincerity, the franchise's next attempt at a female-led story had a great lead performance trapped inside a plot that never figured out how to organize itself. Birds of Prey wanted to be a stylish, fractured timeline crime comedy in the vein of films it clearly admired, and the ambition is admirable, even when the execution buckles under it. Margot Robbie remains a great Harley Quinn, funny, unpredictable, genuinely sympathetic underneath the chaos, but the film surrounding her never settles into a consistent rhythm. The non-linear structure, meant to feel playful, instead makes basic plot beats hard to track on a first watch. Ewan McGregor's Black Mask has the right energy, but not enough screen time to register as a real threat. The action choreography in the final act, particularly the roller derby chase, is genuinely excellent proof the film had real craft underneath the structural mess. It opened to a disappointing $33 million domestically against a $100 million plus budget, a number Warner Brothers publicly attributed in part to the title not clearly signaling Harley Quinn was the lead. The pieces for a great film are all there, they're just scattered across a script that never decides how to assemble them. But while Birds of Prey struggled to find structure for its anti-hero ensemble, the next film on this list proved that total chaos, handled with real craft and intention, could be the best version of this exact concept. James Gunn's The Suicide Squad exists specifically to correct everything the 2016 film got wrong, and it does so by going in the opposite direction, entirely gleeful, R-rated, and willing to kill off characters the marketing had just spent months selling you on. That opening beach assault, where half the cast dies in the first 10 minutes, sets the tone immediately. Nobody here is safe, and the film isn't going to pretend otherwise. King Shark and Polka Dot Man, characters that sound like jokes on paper, become genuinely affecting because Gunn treats their absurdity with sincerity instead of irony. Idris Elba's Bloodsport gives the film a grounded, emotional through line it badly needed. The practical effects, especially Starro in the third act, give the film a tactile quality most modern blockbusters lack. It's chaotic, violent, and very funny. And it proved Gunn understood these characters better than the studio that had been mishandling them for years. While The Suicide Squad proved Gunn understood how to make spectacle feel purposeful, his own follow-up film in this new DC era shows what happens when a great lead performance isn't enough to save a script that never finds its footing. The Flash had a genuinely strong premise. Barry Allen runs back in time, accidentally fractures the timeline, and has to fix a world that's subtly and then catastrophically wrong. For about an hour, it works. Then the film pivots into the most fan service dependent stretch of the entire DCEU, parading through alternate universes packed with cameos that exist purely to generate a reaction rather than serve the story. The de-aged CGI Supergirl and Batman sequences were widely criticized for looking unfinished, with character models that drew comparisons to early 2000s video game cutscenes rather than a modern blockbuster. Michael Keaton's return as Batman is a genuine highlight, but the film leans on his nostalgia so heavily it substitutes for actual narrative tension. The multiverse stakes become so abstract that the emotional core Barry's grief over his mother gets buried under universe-ending CGI battles. It opened a $55 million domestically, badly underperforming projections, and became one of the most expensive box office disappointments in studio history. The Flash isn't bad because it lacked ambition. It's bad because the ambition was aimed at everything except telling its own story well. And while The Flash drowned in nostalgia for characters audiences already loved, the worst film on this list failed by trying to build an identity almost entirely separate from the character's own legacy. This one's a slight departure. Supergirl isn't part of the Snyder era DCEU. It's the second film in James Gunn's rebooted DC universe released this past week, but it's the most relevant, worst conversation happening in DC fandom right now. So it earns the closing spot here. Millie Alcock's performance as Kara Zor-El is almost universally the one thing critics and audiences agree on. She brings real charisma and a believable grief underneath the hard-drinking, wisecracking exterior the script gives her. The problem is everything built around her. IMDb user reviews are split sharply down the middle. Several praise Alcock and the visual world building of the planet-hopping structure, while a significant number describe the plot as thin, the villain Krim as forgettable and derivative, and the pacing as choppy, with one common complaint being that the film borrows its structure so heavily from Mad Max and The Mandalorian that it never establishes its own identity. The CGI dog Crypto, central to the entire plot, drew specific criticism for looking unfinished in several action sequences. Critics were similarly divided. Some called it a stylish, confident genre entry. Others described it as a film with no real story stretched across 2 hours of planet-hopping side quests. It's not a film without merit. It's a film that had a genuinely great lead performance and built a forgettable story around her instead of for her. The best DCEU films all understood exactly what they wanted their characters to mean. Man of Steel's isolation, the Snyder Cut's operatic scale, Wonder Woman's idealism, the Suicide Squad's gleeful chaos. So which entry on this list do you think was ranked completely wrong? And what's the most underrated or overrated DCEU movie of all time? Let me know in the comments.